Leo Taddeo.
Thanks, Steve.
Good evening.
Evening.
So you do that probably once a week. You mentioned that the FBI has a mandate to come over and present some of the doings and some of the kind of the interaction with industry. Mm-hmm. So I'm very happy and thankful that you took the time to meet today. Can you just maybe provide some introduction to yourself in terms of your role, responsibilities here in New York City in general?
Yes. First of all, thanks. The purpose for doing this type of outreach is to really get the FBI's message out to security practitioners and people making decisions on reacting to security incidents. And one of the main things we're trying to do is emphasize the benefits of cooperating with law enforcement and dispel some of the myths about the negatives of cooperating with law enforcement when it comes to a cyber incident. So with that, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to address this crowd. I know there are a lot of practitioners in the audience. To answer your question directly, I'm a native New Yorker. I studied physics in college. I have a law degree and I practiced for a short time. I started my FBI career as an investigator in New York in organized crime. So I spent a lot of my career in organized crime and counterterrorism. And I spent the latter part of my career in international operations. So I conducted investigations overseas and I managed investigations overseas. And I got into the technology part of the business in developing some of our communication systems that we use to communicate with our offices overseas. And from that, I progressed into this position. And in this position, I have not just the cyber investigative piece, but also all of our internal technology. So all of our network components, all of our desktops, all of the tools that our employees use, and I have also some of our collection platforms and some of the things that we use to do our job. So that's a general nutshell of the scope of my responsibilities and generally how I got there.
Thank you. So this is New York City. It's a home for many large enterprise. One of the kind of the challenges specifically to large enterprise, maybe you can touch upon those in terms of cybersecurity and what you see dealing with companies who are here in New York City, specifically headquarters here in New York City, and how do you interact with them on a regular basis?
Yeah, that's a great question. So New York, the majority of, we have over 50 Fortune 500 companies headquartered in the New York area. We have, it's the largest media outlet. It's obviously the large part of the financial infrastructure is here in New York. So most of the threat and most of the vulnerabilities are to the larger enterprises. And so they have a couple of advantages and they have a couple of disadvantages. The advantages that the larger enterprises have obviously are in resources. They can spend more, they can do more in terms of training and investing in technology. But that also comes with the disadvantages of being big, and that is more complexity, more surface area to protect, more churn in terms of people coming and going within the organization, which raises the insider threat and other issues. So while being big helps, it also can be a big hindrance, and it's also harder to change. So I think the biggest challenge for a big organization is being nimble. And when the technology is changing so quickly, reacting to that technology is harder for a bigger organization than it is for a smaller organization. It's more expensive and they have more to change. So I think at the end of the day, being big in the cybersecurity space is generally a net negative, I would say. It's better to be small.
Mm-hmm. And how do they, so as a large company, there's a lot of procedures in place, there's change management, there's different teams that are responsible for different areas within the organization. How do you see that how do they, that mechanism, that organism of a large enterprise deal with an intrusion, with a cybersecurity attack on the organization? Do you find that is also difficult for the different teams to get together, or is it something that they're getting better and better reacting to an incident?
Yeah, it depends. Some large enterprises are well rehearsed and they're really good at incident response. Some large enterprises aren't, and there are a number of things that companies should be doing that they don't necessarily do to prepare for a major cyber incident. And some of them, most of them fall into the category of preparation, knowing your systems, knowing your network, knowing how your networks are configured, and having a plan. and knowing who to go to. So in terms of reaction to, responding to a cyber incident, we see a wide spectrum of capabilities. And that goes to companies taking it seriously. Many companies don't understand that they are vulnerable. I think a lot of companies have yet to grasp, I think it's changing, but many companies have yet to grasp what they have that may be so valuable to the adversary. So if you're in an industry like banking, you understand that you're vulnerable because banking, of course, is where the money is and that's where the bad guys go. But there are other industries that operate big networks that are equally vulnerable, perhaps more vulnerable in some respects to certain adversaries. But they haven't really woken up to it and taken the time and effort to prepare for the inevitable, which is some type of data loss or a breach.
Great. It's funny to mention specifically, what is so valuable, and it's not truly always clear.
Mm-hmm.
We actually had a CTO for an enterprise here, and I mentioned that they were hacked and they were working with a tire manufacturer.
Mm-hmm.
They were hacked, and they tracked it down to a foreign entity.
Mm-hmm.
And what they were after specifically the tire manufacturing process.
Mm-hmm.
They basically wanted to take that information that they gathered through a process of 25 years of creating a better tire, and they wanted to grab that and use that overseas. So obviously you've been doing cybersecurity for a while. So what is your current opinion on the state of affairs today, and have you seen progress or any type of change from the moment you joined your role to today? Have you seen major changes?
Oh, sure. So there are two slopes. One is the adversary's advantage slope, and that's very steep. We see tools that are very effective becoming easier to use, so that the skill level for a hobby hacker doesn't have to be that high to be effective. We also see some of the more sophisticated adversaries getting better at organization. They're investing in research and development. They're investing in talent. They're recruiting. So the slope for the adversary in terms of the threat is very steep. The slope for our defense is increasing, but not as fast. So the gap between the two, I think, is widening. I don't think if the trends continue, we will see more of the significant types of breaches that we've seen in the last year. I don't think we're catching up.
Yeah, it's something that I think the majority of the audience, it seems like almost cybersecurity is becoming front and center as opposed to something that's happening in the back end. And I think one of the contributors to that is the fact that you see a lot of brand names that everybody uses, like Home Depot, Sony, and so on, that come out to the highlights because of an incident. Is there something you can share with the New York Information Security that is not public domain, like in terms of something that or something that maybe tell us some story from whatever you can divulge to the group?
Sure. It's not actually, it's in the public domain, but it's been underreported. I think, and it's worth mentioning, it was the hacktivist reaction to the events in Ferguson with the shooting of Michael Brown. What was underreported, and I think is something for security professionals to contemplate and consider in their planning, is the targeting of police officials by hacktivists. They were doxxed. They were, which means their personal information was pasted to certain websites for public disclosure. Some of the police websites were defaced. And so it doesn't matter where you stand on the issue as a security professional. If any of your executives are involved in a controversial issue, whether they are part of banking and they may be the target of certain hacktivists, the adversary is now making it personal against certain individuals. The chief of police for Ferguson was targeted. Some of his officers were targeted by hacktivists. So I think if you're in this business and you're constantly thinking about your network, you're right. But we have seen that the adversary isn't just about the network. They're also about making individuals feel uncomfortable and perhaps highlighting their skill to that segment of the institution, and so it's something that we need to think about. So I think it's in the public domain, but it's just not reported as much, and I think it's something worth highlighting, and that is, while you're responsible for the equipment, you're also responsible for the people who run that equipment, the people who make the decisions, and you need to take that into account when you do your training and awareness.
Great. You know, doing some research for for this conversation, I came across the term the FBI 5-point strategy.
Yeah.
Maybe you can provide a brief overview of what that is.
Right. So the director sets our mission. Director Jim Comey, director of the FBI, he sets our mission, he sets our strategy, and my job in New York is to make it operational. I operationalize the director's strategy. So he has a 5-point strategy, and I'll go over all 5. I'll focus on one. The first part is focus. So we can't prioritize everything. Not everything can be a priority. So we have to focus on the most important targets. We don't have enough resources to address every cyber incident, obviously. We try to figure out who the adversaries are that are having the greatest negative impact and focus on those, just like any business. The second is, as he puts it, he wants to shrink the world. And what he explains that to mean is placing some of our agents in embassies around the world so that the information sharing time is shortened. So we have 80 permanent offices overseas, and 14 of those we have specialists that specialize just in cyber investigations in some of the critical countries. The third, which I'll talk a little bit about, is impose cost on the adversary, which I'll elaborate on. The fourth and fifth are improve relationships with our state and local police partners, and the fifth is improve relationship with the private sector. So the third one is really what I'm in the business of doing, and that is imposing a cost on the adversary. So if you're a technical expert, you're interested in how the network behaves. If you're a security expert, you may be interested in how the user behaves in order to make it harder for the adversary. My main objective is how the adversary behaves, and to try to create a deterrent for the adversary. So it correlates to the third priority for the director, imposing a cost. We have some very tough cyber security laws. The penalties are very high, and just about anything you do on the internet that is without authorization can be somehow fit in one of those statutes. So we don't have a hard time finding the right law to charge individuals. The problem with creating a deterrent is making people understand that their likelihood of being caught is high enough to dissuade them. And so with all the challenges of attributing an attack beyond the initial layers that you can see on the system, it's our job really to trace down who's responsible, who's behind an attack. And imposing a cost is different for a hobby hacktivist or a hobby hacker in his basement in New York and the People's Liberation Army in China. So those two ends of the spectrum make it a challenge.
Mm-hmm. So there's two questions that kind of segue to that. Is one, do you partner with your counterparts in different countries, or is that something you can disclose?
Oh yeah, sure. So we work with every country, almost every country. There are very few countries we don't work with. Obviously, North Korea is one of them. Some other regimes are difficult to work with, but we have varying degree of cooperation with just about every country out there. For the countries that cooperate fully, the cyber criminals in those countries are subject to arrest and extradition depending on the local law, and so creating a deterrent. Finding them is one thing, but once found and charged, we can usually get a country to cooperate with extradition, or at least charge the individual in that country and perhaps create a criminal liability in that country instead of this country. So the question is, what about countries that don't cooperate? What about Russia is difficult to deal with, China is difficult to deal with, Iran, North Korea, some other regimes are very difficult to deal with because they don't recognize the request for extradition, and neither do we. When they ask us to extradite, we just don't do it. So it's not a one-way street. I'm not saying they should cooperate. We should have better relations in general. But if you're a hacker in Russia and you are charged in the United States, you may not go to prison, but in the United States, but your prison becomes the Russian Federation. So any attempt to leave, we have a long memory, we have a long reach. It's amazing how long and how far the U.S. government can reach into a foreign country to arrest a person. So if you are committed to spending the rest of your life within the borders of a regime that may not be so friendly to you, and a lot of these folks fall in and out of favor with the regime, so one day you may feel safe, another day you may not. But it's a risky business to be in, because if you can't leave, there's certainly a penalty there. It's not as good as getting someone and putting them in jail in the United States, but it does limit their freedom of movement, and we think creates somewhat of a deterrent.
Thank you. And then it leads me to the next question. You mentioned point number 5, which is, I believe, the cooperation with industry. So tell us a bit, and it's kind of a lofty goal, since there's a lot of industry and there's a lot of incidents. On a day-to-day basis, maybe you can describe how that actually works in actuality, and as well as maybe provides an example of, when an incident occurs, do they call you? Do you call them? What's the process of working with enterprise?
So I quote this statistic a lot. I think it's generally accurate, and we have, anecdotally, I think it lines up. There are instances where a company is obligated to report to the government that they've had a breach, and that is whether they've triggered the loss of information in certain state laws, or certain negative impacts, financial impacts for the consumer. But in cases where a breach does not trigger mandatory notification, 56% of companies have reported in surveys that they don't notify the government. So more than half of the companies out there that are breached with significant data losses, unless obligated, aren't reporting it. So, for example, if a loss of intellectual property is detected, it doesn't necessarily trigger a mandatory reporting requirement. It may under some SEC regulations. But let's assume that we can create a category where you're not obligated. 56% of those instances, they're not reporting to the government. We want to change that. We want to increase that number. We want more people to report to us. It gives us better visibility. And the analogy is not perfect, but I'll give it to you anyway. If you had a burglary ring operating in your neighborhood and only some of your neighbors told the police about it, it'd be much harder for the police to catch them. And we kind of use that as a way to convince people that it's collectively keeping us safe if you report. Now, that doesn't make your company's bottom line any better if we're all safer. And that's what really boards of directors and CEOs are concerned about. They're concerned about the bottom line. So the first decision that's made, is this going to hurt us or help us? And we think, obviously we don't want to get into the business decision-making business, but we do want to convince CEOs, convince general counsels that we have something to offer and that it's not as bad as you think. So we're trying to change that dynamic.
Okay. Well, obviously you're doing the right thing by talking to industry directly and doing a lot of this outreach. So recently, a few of the group members here have seen the Black Hat movie, and in that movie, there's a scene there where all major organizations like the FBI, NSA, and DHS, come together, and it was easy as basically just picking up the phone to your counterpart and combining forces. Is that really the case, or is this the Hollywood type of?
The relationships are very strong. We embed FBI agents at NSA and at DHS, and they do the same. So I have NSA and other representatives I have direct relationships with all the time. So the relationships are informal, but the process is very formal. So there's the initial discussions that will occur at the outset of a crisis about how to approach it, and then there's the paperwork that follows, and that paperwork is reviewed by the lawyers, and we can't really do anything until it's approved. But I think it's accurate to say that I'm on a first name and very familiar basis with my counterpart in the other agencies, and they pick up the phone and BlackBerry me or email me and all the time.
Okay, so just two more questions, and then we'll open up the for the audience. In doing some research, I come across this very interesting topic here. From last year from Bloomberg, it's kind of a wild, wild west right now. U.S. Representative Michael McCall, Texas Republican, Chairman of House of Homeland Security Committee. Some victim companies may be conducting offensive operations without getting permission from federal government. He said the idea of hacker-on-hacker justice raises difficult questions. In your opinion, what is driving this type of activity, and how, in your opinion, should companies react? Is proactive, preemptive hacking prohibitive or endorsed by your organization?
Yeah. So there's a lot of frustration in industry, especially companies that are being targeted every day, that the government's not doing much or enough to protect them. So if you're a major financial institution and day after day you have a sovereign state attacking your systems with almost unlimited resources, you're asking yourself what the government is doing about it. And so some commercial enterprises and some folks have said that the answer to that is to allow our hackers to hack back, but that's very, very problematic. For one, the way the U.S. laws are written, and there isn't a lot of case law to really clarify what it means, but as written, there's no exception for defensive hacking. So if you without authorization, enter someone's computer, even if that person is attacking your system, there's nowhere in the law that you can claim a defense because you were only defending yourself from someone else. So just like, give the burglary analogy again, if you know that your neighbor is burglarizing your house, it doesn't give you the right to kick his door down and take your stuff back. So you open yourself to criminal liability if you engage in hacking in retaliation. The other thing too is third-party liability. Many times you're not sure who's hacking you, and if you have unintended second and third level effects because you are sending tools and other malicious activity across the internet, you may damage a network that's very expensive to fix, and if you're a corporation with assets, you may have to someday make that other party whole. So I think it's fraught with peril. I don't think anybody really takes that seriously. So I'd counsel against it, but I would, obviously talk to your own general counsel and see what she thinks, and we may agree or disagree, depending on what you do.
And then last general question is, there's a lot of security practitioners here. People are part of this, cybersecurity effort to protect the enterprise. On an individual level, what can one do, to assist in that process, and how can they, once again, on an individual level, interact with the FBI?
Great question. So we were talking earlier, I was in Israel last month, and I went there to see how our counterparts are handling the problem, what they're doing, what we could take back. And there's a lot of technology out there, and many people think that spending more on technology is the answer. And I think in some cases it solves some problems, but here's what I took away and what we need to do better, and that is create the culture of security. The Israelis are very finely tuned on an individual basis. Every single person in that country is finely tuned to the security situation that they face, and as a result, their behavior is a defensive one, and they are very aware that the adversary is trying to target them in many ways. I think in the United States we haven't reached that level, and if you're a security practitioner, the biggest effect you can have is conveying to the users that what they do is usually, 90% of the time, the user action is the vector that the adversary is using to get into the network. So it's someone opening up a spear phishing email, it's somebody downloading content from a malicious website, it's somebody plugging in something into the network that shouldn't be plugged into the network. So raising that awareness is the biggest bang for the buck. I think it's the area where we can make the most progress in the shortest period of time, and it's probably the cheapest. Instead of installing all kinds of intrusion detection systems and other expensive technology, changing the way people use our systems, I think is the most cost-effective thing we can do in the short term.
Okay, perfect. So now, in the last 5 minutes, why don't we open up the floor to any questions you may have to Leo. Go ahead.
Crystal ball, what are your 2015 predictions?
So that's a good question. I got that a couple weeks ago too. So we started 2014 with the retail hacks, and we ended 2014 with media hacks. So it's impossible, I think, to predict what the next big hack will be, but I guarantee we're going to have another tremendous breach. It's going to be probably because of some sloppy cyber hygiene, some computer hygiene. People aren't protecting passwords or doing some of the simple stuff. It's not going to be a hyper-sophisticated adversary using tools we haven't seen before. It's going to be a target of opportunity that lets the bad guy in and takes full advantage of that access. So more of the same in terms of reasons for the significant hacks, meaning sloppy hygiene, but the adversary and how they are thinking and what they're going after, I think, is going to surprise us. That goes back to what we talked about earlier, in that we don't fully understand what's of value to our adversaries. Many people think, it's easy to think if you're Coca-Cola and you're trying to protect your secret formula, it's pretty simple straight line thinking. If they get my formula, they'll make Coca-Cola, they'll sell it at a cheaper price, and all my research and development and trademark and everything else will be undermined. But that's not the only thing they're after. They're after your business practices, they're after your communications to know what your business tempo is, who you're doing business with, what your negotiation strategy. If you have the time, and I'll point something out that's very much worth reading, is there's an indictment out of the Western District of Pennsylvania. It was in May of 2014. We indicted 5 PLA officers, and in the indictment, there's a public accusation of what they were after. And if you read that indictment, it gives you great insight into what the adversary thinks is valuable. It's not necessarily the secret formula. They're not trying, some of the most sophisticated adversaries aren't trying to transfer money out of an account without you knowing about it. What they're trying to do is determine your litigation strategy in a billion-dollar lawsuit, rather than steal $100,000 from you by stealing credentials and making a transfer without you being able to detect it. The most advanced adversaries out there aren't trying to get an advantage in business. They're trying to put you out of business. They're trying to take the sector from you. They're trying to take markets from you. And they're not doing it in the years or a quarterly time cycle. They're doing it in a 10 and 20 and 50-year time cycle. So our business leaders have to think hard about what they have, and it's not necessarily what you think it is. And that's why we're constantly being surprised. Yes, ma'am.
All right, so with all these threats to IP and other internal information, what is your take on this whole new series of messaging apps that self-destruct, that are encrypted and self-destruct?
Maybe you'd like to repeat that question.
Yeah, in terms from a security perspective, an encrypted message.
Yeah, what's the government's perspective on that?
Oh, are you talking about the government's ability to decrypt information that may be...
To know about it?
Yeah. Okay, I think I know we have, the director talked about this as well. We have a great challenge in some of the encryption that's being installed on personal devices. Apple has an operating system that encrypts the data with very powerful encryption so that the data only resides on the device. So in some instances you can back up your data to a cloud, and if the data resides on the cloud, there are certain ways to retrieve it in an unencrypted form. But there are devices being marketed today that are almost impossible to decrypt. And apps to put on. And you're right, communication applications that allow individuals to communicate in a way that cannot be easily decrypted. You're absolutely right. The answer to that is a tremendous challenge for the government. The director's gone on TV and he's put it this way. Imagine if you had a car that you couldn't, the government wasn't allowed to open the trunk of the car. We weren't allowed to search certain parts of a house for a kidnap victim. This is the equivalent. We have a number of cases just in the last year where being able to access data on a phone, a handheld telephone, was critical in finding kidnap victims. And so it's not getting any better. The encryption technologies are harder to break. They're more sophisticated. They're being used as a marketing device by the Android operating system and Apple as well. And people are conflating privacy with security, and we're not so sure. There ought to be a discussion. Look, the FBI is going to do whatever Congress tells us to do in terms of limiting our access, but we want people to understand that there is a real price in terms of collective security if the U.S. government is unable, with a lawful court order. No one's talking about monitoring. We're talking about going to a judge, getting a court order to search a device. Even with that court order, there are some devices we can't search. And if you look on Apple, Apple has a, I'll just end with this. Apple has one of the marketing tools on its website literally states, even if we got a court order, no one could access your data. So it's something that they're selling their device, and we think it's wrong. I mean, our directors come out with it, and that's our position on it. If that's what the American people want, fine, but there will be some security issues going forward.
Go ahead.
Sir.
Whether or not the data can be recovered because of the visibility of the evidence and the fact that it's attempted to encrypt can make the evidence, even if you do decrypt it and obtain it, may not be admissible in court.
If we have a valid court order and there aren't any other issues with how we got it, meaning it was lawfully obtained, the fact that it was encrypted and we decrypted it, I don't know of any obstacle to admissibility just on the fact that we were able to decrypt it.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, great. The question is, how are we incentivizing our workforce? We're all, so corporations and law enforcement and the intelligence community are all fishing in the same pool. We're all trying to find the same talent. There aren't enough. It's a new industry, it's a new specialty, it's a new profession, if you will. So getting really good talent is tough, and when you manage to get the talent, many times they don't stay. They go to greener pastures. And the government's not known to be the best employer in terms of monetary compensation. We're good, but we're not the best. There are banks and other institutions that pay a lot more. What we offer, though, and I'll get right to the incentive part, but let me say this first. What we offer, though, is a sense of service. It's a sense of being part of something important. It's a sense of solving problems that affect not just the bottom line of a company, but maybe your community as well. So we're looking for somebody who has that sense of commitment as well, problem solvers who aren't just in it for the money. But in terms of creating real incentives, financial incentives and career incentives, we do have some special tracks for cyber computer scientists and cyber special agents. We've created some recruitment initiatives in colleges. We do have some contests. They're not widely advertised, but you can find them on FBI.gov. But we face the same challenges as every bank, major corporation, and law enforcement and intelligence agency out there. We're looking for the same talent. There aren't many.
Last question, go ahead.
What's your position on the cloud security? It seems that this is very neglected. Enterprise extension to the point that look like security
Well, I think the market's going to drive security, and the cloud, you can see some of the companies that are good at it are marketing how good they are at the security piece. There are security challenges if data is collected in one place. Whether or not it's segregated properly is always a challenge. But I think if you look at some of the major providers, the cloud service providers, they are hiring and are the best talent out there, and they are spending a lot of money to keep data safe because they know that chances are if they do get a significant breach, they won't be in that business for very long. So it all depends on how it's implemented and how it's maintained. So those are really the key questions, but that goes for your network as well as where you're storing your data.
Perfect. Leo, it's been a pleasure.
Great,
Thank you very
thanks,
much
David. I
for-
appreciate it. Thank you very much.